Fedora Fiction Podcasts present Throwback, Ares Triumphant by Tom Goss. Throwback, Book 1, Ares Triumphant, copyright 2019, Thomas C. Goss, Fedora Fiction Press, St. Louis, Missouri. All rights reserved. Early versions of some chapters of this novel originally published on the blog nascentfiction.wordpress.com. For Sean Hart, who was there at the start. Chapter 1, The Infernal Machine. A man lay on a table surrounded by lights and masked and gowned crowd of physicians and nurses. They were not looking at the man, but at the bright monitors of various colors that hung arrayed over their heads. Only one display in particular seemed to hold their attention, and that was the one indicating the man's temperature. Given the inactivity of the other devices monitoring the man's heartbeat, respiration, and brainwaves, a casual observer would have thought that the assembled medical team was far too late. One person, it seemed, was all that would be required to pull a blanket over the man's head. But the team remained, the temperature monitor holding them wrapped. Even our casual observer, however, would have noticed that, despite the man's blue pallor and stillness, his temperature was actually rising. Finally, a threshold of sorts was crossed, and the man drew a shallow breath, and his heart, if the monitor was to be believed, beat once. The medical team leapt into action, one group administering medications through an IV line and another firing up an electric defibrillator. The digital readout of the temperature monitor reached higher and higher integers at an ever-increasing rate, and the man's breath began to fog the mask over his face, and the once flat line indicating his heart rate became rhythmic peaks and valleys. The man began to shiver violently, inciting several members to leap upon him, shouting for heated blankets. After some minutes, the shivering subsided, and the man began to stir in a purposeful manner. The medical team stood back as the man propped himself up on an elbow and removed the oxygen mask from his face. "God damn it, Nordstrom, why didn't you get me all the way under?" The room erupted in laughter, and some of the medical personnel moved to the man's side to help him to his feet. One of the first to him was the one called Nordstrom. "Adam," she said gently, in an accent colored by the European North, "you have been under for 3 weeks." Hours later, Lena Nordstrom found Adam O'Shea in the canteen, staring into a steaming mug of miso, soybean soup. He looked up as she took a seat across the table. "So," he said, looking her in the eye, "my infernal machineless work. You left me under for the full 3 weeks." "Yeah," she admitted. "There were no problems. How do you feel?" "A little like a time traveler." He shook his head slightly. "I have no sense of any time passing at all. I remember the chill of going under, and then it seemed I just came right back up." He shook his head again. 3 weeks. What have I missed?" "Oh, the usual," Nordstrom sighed. "Scandal, crimes, politics. And Becke got full funding for the whole Martian economic development project." "The whole project?" O'Shea looked confused. He barely got enough for the exploratory mission. What happened? "The exploratory mission has, how you say it's cold," Nordstrom said without a hint of sarcasm. "Almost half the ice on Mars is heavy water." "Half?" "If that's even half true, that represents an almost unlimited energy supply." He sips his soup. "Remind me to call Hart and get those fusion generators into production." "Do you like the miso?" Nordstrom asked, by way of nothing. Adam shrugged. "It's not as good as it usually is." "We ran out of soybeans last week." She could barely suppress a smile. "The new crop will not be in for 2 months." "So this is sewer scum?" Adam sighed. "I guess it's not bad considering. Still, I should have been told." "It is your greatest invention, and you push your nose up." "Turn up my nose." "Yes, you turn your nose up." Nordstrom responded patiently. Are you such a snob? No, I think I mean snot, Nordstrom countered. Are you such a snot that you can't eat what most of the world eats? Is the great Adam too great for the fruits of his own invention? Remind me again why I don't fire you, Shay asked, a wry smile on his face. Because I am brilliant and call you on your bullshit. Your words exactly. Oh, yeah, he laughs. I remember now. So what further tests do we need to get this thing rolling, Doc? I would imagine Lunze would want to hear that it worked on more than its inventor and for more than 3 weeks, she replied casually, which means we'll need additional units. They should be rolling off the production line any day now. Nordstrom arched her eyebrows. And if something had gone wrong? Adam shrugged. He who hesitates is lost, Lena. Any small problem could be fixed post-production. Any big problem, well, would be somebody else's. You mean mine, she retorted dryly. As it happens, yes, O'Shea admitted. That's what it means to be in the number 2 spot. Are we close enough that we can pitch it to the UNSA board? We still need data to perfect the automatic recovery process. Nordstrom reported. As soon as we get that, we can start selling them. I'll call him Benkei. One of the biggest obstacles to recruiting personnel for the rapid colonization and economic exploitation of the Red Planet is the 6-month voyage in zero gravity, O'Shea asserted, standing comfortably in front of the UN Space Agency board. Attempts at creating artificial gravity have failed to generate enough G's to prevent the bone loss and muscle atrophy of long space flights. Even if the astronauts exercise diligently, the few that have already made the journey arrive too weak to accomplish any real work and have to spend additional months reacquainting themselves with gravity. At this point, images of weak, struggling astronauts beamed months ago from Mars appeared on the screen behind him. Not everyone tolerates the permanent confinement well, he continued, and the long voyage, as we know, uncovered many unsuitable candidates, alas, too late. Stasis would eliminate the stress of the voyage, and the self-contained units would mean personnel could be shipped like freight in cargo holds that would not require bulky and expensive light support systems. The process, however, takes a great deal of emotional and physical courage. At this point, the image has changed to that of O'Shea being induced into stasis. The subject is drowned in an icy liquid polymer that rapidly drops his or her body temperature to the point where all physiologic activity is virtually halted. The polymer, like hemoglobin, easily exchanges oxygen for carbon dioxide, and the stasis units use this to diffuse off the waste gas and diffuse in the tiny amounts of oxygen the subject needs. Cellular respiration is so slow under these conditions that a person ages only 1 minute a year, which is as long as anyone need anticipate being under stasis. How do you reverse the process? Yole Mbeke, director of the agency, asked. Unlike the descent, which is how we describe the induction process, O'Shea replied, reviving the subject takes much more time. The body temperature has to be raised slowly and evenly. Our units, however, are automated, and the process can begin while the personnel are still en route. That way, they can be conscious in a short time after arrival on Mars and functional within a day. It sounds too good to be true, Mbeke observed skeptically. I suppose next you'll be telling us that you'll give us all the units we need. Give them, Mbeke? Adams replied, smiling. You know be better than that. However, I think even you will find my terms reasonable. Mbeke snorted. You and I have different ideas of what is reasonable, Adam. But since we are on the subject, why don't you give us some idea of just what those terms may be? 100 million per unit and maintenance contracts for 10 years? A startled murmur runs through the rest of the board. Adam smiled. Well, Yole, if you insist. The rest of the board erupted in laughter as Mbeke sputtered. That was in no way a serious proposal. Adam waved his hand dismissively. Of course not, Yole. What I had in mind actually was a trade. The agency gets the technology and the patent in exchange for a little transportation and some real estate on Mars. Now you are mocking me, Adam, and Becky chided. Shame on you. Not at all, O'Shea replied. All I want in exchange for this technology is a piece of Mars on one of the ice fields, and a one-way trip for myself and some cargo. Actually, a lot of cargo. In exchange, the agency will get ownership of the Stasis Corporation, subject, of course, to all prior agreements with the current employees, and I get a new home on Mars. What will you do on Mars? A board member asked, bewildered. Enjoy some privacy, Adam replied, poker-faced. I assume, Mbeke chimed in, that a blind eye to your activities on Mars is part of the deal. Perceptive as always, Yole, Adam replied. The agency needn't worry, however. All I plan to do is indulge in some old hobbies in my retirement. What sort of hobbies? Oh, archery, for example. Archery, Mbeke echoed dubiously. Yes, and gardening. Gardening, again the dubious echo. Will you be taking up macrame and basket weaving as well? I hadn't thought about it, O'Shea replied, deadpan, but those are excellent suggestions. Mbeke slept back in his chair, shaking his head. I assume you have a piece of real estate in mind, he asked finally. Yes. The specifics are in the formal proposal you have in front of you. I want 500 hectares on and around the North Polar ice cap. Prime real estate, Mbeke noted. It's a prime product and a prime company you're getting. When will these units begin production? As soon as you say you want them. Well, Mbeke said, standing, we will, of course, have to discuss this and run the specs by our own people. Of course, O'Shea replied, shaking Mbeke's hand. By the way, how are the automated orbiting depots and shuttles working? Perfectly, Mbeke replied with a wry smile. As if you didn't know. Archery. Nordstrom had waited until they were alone in their automated hover vehicle to speak. O'Shea had brought her along, ostensibly to answer any medical questions regarding the stasis units, but the real reason was to introduce her to the board, as she would be running the Stasis Corporation once he left for Mars. And gardening. Please tell me you were joking about the macrame. I don't even know what that is, O'Shea admitted, but yes, archery and gardening. What's so hard to believe about that? Have you ever even pulled a bow? Drawn a bow. One draws a bow. Draws? She used her right index finger to draw a stick figure in the air. Draw as to pull, like a horse-drawn carriage. And yes, I've drawn a bow. I made one with my grandfather years ago. We hunted deer on his property. Hunted? How barbaric, she actually shuddered. It would have been more barbaric to let the deer population overgraze the land, and starve to death. Besides, we ate the meat and made use of the hides and bones. That does not make it less barbaric. Should we hunt and eat people because the population is overgrown? People are not deer, he replied evenly. They can choose to take steps to control their own population. They evidently choose not to. You always were a throwback, Nordstrom observed dryly. Silence hung in the air a moment or two. So, gardening. Nordstrom spoke up again. Are you planning to raise petunias on Mars? 5,000 hectares of petunias would be quite a sight, O'Shea replied thoughtfully. But no, I hadn't thought about petunias per se, but I can add them to my list. What is on your list? Oh, O'Shea replied casually, a little of everything. Everything. That is going to be one large garden. Yes, it is. He looked out the window at the passing throngs. I hope to recreate natural environments from Earth under the domes. He smiled at her sheepishly. I know it won't be what it was really like, but I hope to preserve something of the Earth that was. Sounds more like a vacation than a hobby. Vacation? He frowned. Oh, his face relaxed into a grin. Vocation. You mean vocation. Vacation is a holiday. Vocation, vacation. Nordstrom threw up her hands. English. Speaking of my vacation, O'Shea said, taking a tablet from his breast pocket, I'm sending you some biometrics. He tapped the screen on the tablet. I'd like some units customized to those specifications. Nordstrom looked at her own tablet. These aren't normal human parameters, she noted quizzically. These look like metrics for animals. Are you planning on opening a zoo? In a manner of speaking, O'Shea replied. You can't have a complete environment without wildlife, flora, and fauna. What about human company? He shrugged. There'll be other people on Mars. There's some there now. Yeah, Nordstrom replied dryly. And they all share your interests, I'm sure. May we get the UNSA order filled before we interrupt the line for these customized ones? Do we have an UNSA order? A wise man told me that she who hesitates is lost, the doctor replied dryly. We anticipate they will need 100,000 units. That sounds right. It will be a year before they get everything up and running, O'Shea added. So sure, fill the UNSA order first. The hover car abruptly rose and ascended to a rooftop garage. They exited the vehicle and walked breathlessly through the oppressive heat into the air-conditioned building. They both paused inside the doors to catch their breath and let the cooler and drier air soothe the red flush from their skins. I'm also going to need some climate-controlled storage, O'Shea said, as the beads of perspiration evaporated his forehead. Unit 5 should be big enough. What will you be storing? Nordstrom asked after checking her tablet as the state of Unit 5. Biological specimens, seeds, cryopreserved embryos, stuff like that. How soon? And don't tell me yesterday, she glared at him. Next week should be fine, he assured her. Next week? Is the great Adam O'Shea learning patience? Nordstrom asked in mock astonishment. Yes, he admitted Riley, and it's painful, I assure you. That ends Chapter 1 of Throwback. Copies of this novel, as all my novels, are available at amazon.com/author/Tom Goss, all one word. Thanks for listening.